Coming up on this episode of the Upper One Podcast, we pay tribute to the one and only, there will never be another, Alaska's Balladeer, Hobo Jim.
And now, podcasting from the great state of Alaska, this is the Upper One Podcast.
Before we get started, I want to thank you all for giving me permission to use your stories in this collaboration as a tribute to Hobo Jim. And if I mispronounce your names, please forgive me. I hope that this turns out as well for you as it did in my mind putting this together. So let's get started. I thought it fitting to put this next story right here at the beginning because this is where it all started. This is the story that came off of his Facebook page where he talks about hitchhiking and freight riding across the United States before coming to Alaska. So I've been doing these little road stories and have been trying to limit myself to one story a week. I have also tried to limit myself to one drink a day at times. So anyway, after my last post, I had several people ask about how I came to Alaska. One friend in particular knew me when I was riding freights around the Kentucky-Tennessee hills as well as the rest of the country, and I had pledged to myself to learn at least one song a day, which I did. To say in my road days I wandered aimlessly is an understatement. I would hitch and freight from Kentucky to Florida, to New Orleans, to San Francisco, to Seattle, to Green River, to New York City and back, all in the time of a few weeks, and then pretty much do it again. I remember being bored in Jacksonville and taking a U.S. map at a gas station, closing my eyes and whooshing my finger across the map. Where it landed is where I went. Some unknown town in Oklahoma. But there were tales along the way. It really didn't matter where I went, for at the time I was truly alone and without roots. Good times, bad times. Mostly good. I was street singing on Jackson Square during Mardi Gras and trying to learn a few licks from a famous old street singer named Babe Stovall. My meals were from street change and were usually had at the wonderful Buster homes, red beans, rice, and bread. Sometimes a treat of Benet and chicory coffee from a Café du Monde. Buster was a legend among down and outers, a true saint. One day, just before the big crowds came for Mardi Gras, I was singing on the square when a horse patrol cop came up and told me the only ones allowed to sing on the street were blind or crippled folk, and he'd be glad to make me legal. They were just trying to clean up their city before the show, and I took the hint. I found a coffee house I could play at 1212 Royal Street. It made me a little money, and I met a pretty young girl with a gypsy heart. We took a flop house on Camp Street for a short while, and then with another friend of ours, we jumped in a beat-up old car and headed for Port Aransas, Texas. Our other friend went his way, and me and my gypsy spirit friend banged around the Gulf, El Paso, Juarez, and then decided to hitch to Vancouver, British Columbia to see a friend of hers. I'd almost always traveled alone, and it was wonderful and sometimes terrifying to have someone else with me. We made Vancouver and found her friend had moved to Williams Lake, another 320 miles north. My friend went on by herself, and I made friends with a bunch of Crees in Gastown and made some street singing money. When I had enough, I jumped an incredibly cold winter freight to Williams Lake, but the view was unforgettable. When I reached Williams Lake, my friend and her friend had packed their backpacks and wanted to hitch, pre-pipeline in the winter, to Alaska. Why not? It took us 10 days or so with improper clothing and no money. Bar singing for tips got us a little, but it was rough. All the rides were from locals going 20 to 30 miles. We finally caught a ride just north of Whitehorse in a fancy motorhome with some airmen going all the way to Alaska. I sang all the way. There was food, warmth, and drink. Life was better. We hit Anchorage in the end of February and were dropped off at the King's X Bar, now Van's Dive Bar. Mel McDaniel was an airman playing there along with a man named Lucky Long and another man named Eric Thompson. I sat in for a few songs, and Eric offered to drive the three of us to his cabin in North Kenai. We intruded on his great Alaskan hospitality long enough, and he drove us to Homer. I will never forget the beauty of first cresting the hill and seeing the Kachemak Bay. No matter what happens next, I knew I was settling down. Kind of. Homer was a small, quiet town, yet untouched by tourism and not known as an arts community. It was a fishing village with lots of church folk and several bars full of very rough and rowdy fishermen. After a few months, the girls went their way, and I decided to stay. It was the best decision I made in my life until I met my wife. Well, more later. Thanks, Alaska, for being so good to me. Thanks for my gypsy, still good friend. Thanks, Cindy. Just another story from the road. Hobo Jim. So one of my first stories that I shared with Hobo Jim was back in the 90s. There was an infomercial put on by a guy named Alex Langer, and it was for a fishing lure called the Flying Lure. And Hobo Jim was part of that. I looked. I can't find any of those videos with Hobo Jim in them. I don't know where they're at, if they're even still around. At that time, I believe I was still in high school, and Hobo Jim was on that infomercial fishing with these flying lures. And if anybody knows anything about those flying lures, they're pretty unique on how they work. So I brought that up to Hobo Jim. You know, everybody knows that infectious smile that he has. His smile went ear to ear, and he couldn't believe that somebody had remembered him being a part of that infomercial. You know, it was great times. I don't remember the whole conversation, but that was the majority of that conversation, was talking about that infomercial. And I will never forget that he was the reason I bought those lures. This next story comes from Jenn Messick of Wasilla. I was about 16 at the fair with my dad, and I begged my dad to stop at the sluice box so I could hear Hobo Jim. Reluctantly, he obliged. Once inside, Hobo sang this song, and my dad chimed in on the chorus, loudly. So loudly that in fact he was almost louder than Hobo, who literally stopped playing so everyone could hear my dad yodeling. Just a few years before my dad died, in 2001, we were hiking Exit Glacier near Seward, and we ran into Hobo. My dad just started yodeling, and Hobo joined in, their yodels echoing off the ice and the mountains. It was amazing. One of my cherished memories of both of them. All right, this next story comes from a gentleman by the name of Jim Miller. Rest in peace, dear friend Hobo Jim. I took this picture in January 2019 when Jim came to my beach house for a private concert. We stopped at the Tides Tavern in Gig Harbor, Washington for lunch that he insisted on buying. When he left to use the restroom, he left his famous hat on the table, and I was in awe just having him sitting across the table from me. I thought, what an awesome picture. So I took it. What a beautiful memory. This photo holds dear to my heart, and his hat will never be empty. I will see you in heaven, Hobo. Won't be long till we are all together again in eternal life. I love you. Another email I received with the story was from Cindy Ranta. I came to Seward back in 1998 and fell in love with his music, entertainment, and humor. I looked forward to summers when he would play every Sunday night at the Yukon Bar. It was always a packed house. On one of those nights, Hobo climbed up on the narrow 4-foot-high table next to me to play his guitar. What he didn't realize, he was that much closer to the ceiling and the light fixtures. He bumped into the hanging light, which pretty much exploded, and the bare wire hanging there hit his shoulders, which zapped him good. Oh my God, the laughter. He kept going, ouch, then ouch, over and over again. If I recall, it burned him a bit, but that didn't stop him. It just added more humor to an already very humorous night. That twinkle in his eye and genuine smile, always loving life to the fullest, is how I will remember him. This next story comes from Mike Stark. If you'd been around the rodeo scenes up here in the 90s and the early 2000s, you would hear his voice as he was the rodeo announcer for a couple of the rodeos. Well, Mike and I, we've known each other, but most recently we found out that we are, by way of marriage, cousins. Well, here's Mike's story. I met Jim in 1988 at BJ's in Soldotna. First time I'd seen him play and was an instant fan. I was privileged to have shared a couple of episodes on a local music talent TV show on PBS in 1989 with him, which was where I first got to really know him. A few years later, when I was announcing local rodeos, Jim came to sing the national anthem for us to open a show. I hadn't seen him in 2 or 3 years, yet he remembered me by name. His memory always amazed me, from his recall of literally thousands of song lyrics and music to people's names that he hadn't met but once or twice. That was the nature of the man. He remembered people, knew how to make them feel good and important. He generally cared about them. His love for Alaska, our military, and our country were evident everywhere he went. I saw him at the Anchorage airport one evening while we were both awaiting flights. He talked about his recent trip on the USO tour and how much it meant to him to be able to go see and perform for our deployed servicemen and women. His was a truly patriotic heart. I hadn't seen him in a few years as I relocated to the lower 48, and it saddens me that now I never will. To a good and honest man, I tip my hat to you, James Varsos. May your soul find peace and happiness in the house of the Lord. May God comfort your beautiful bride in the days to come. The world is a lesser place without you in it. Well, I sure do appreciate that story, Mike. If anybody could tell, as I was closing that story off, I was starting to get choked up, because we all have our unique stories and experiences with Hobo Jim, and it's hard not to think about what he meant to all of us and where we're at now with him not in our lives. So thanks again, Mike. I'm having a hard time right now just finishing this story off. But speaking of that, I want to tell another story that came directly off of Hobo Jim's Facebook page that I believe is one of the stories, if not the story, Mike was talking about, with Hobo Jim talking about his USO tours and how much he loved playing for our military servicemen and women. So with that being said, I will move right on to this next one. One of the stories I found on the fan club page was by Suzy Crosby. I direct messaged her and asked her for permission to use that story on this tribute episode. When she replied, she said I would absolutely be honored, and she gave me another story that I'm going to use later on this episode. So here is Suzy's first story. I first met Hobo Jim right here on the Homer Spit at Land's End in 1983. I had just come up for the summer as a singer-songwriter, and I went to see Hobo's show on my night off. I was quickly drawn into his songs and stories, and we struck up an immediate friendship. I had a gig at Land's End myself the next summer and thought about calling and inviting him to come to my show, but I guess I was feeling shy and didn't do it. A guy came up to the stage to chat as I was setting up, and I didn't recognize him for a second until he said, "Hi, I'm Hobo Jim. Remember me?" We had just enough time before the show for him to play me a new tune he had just written that day, Grandpa Hunted Coon. We followed each other around the Kenai all summer, alternating nights in BJ's Wheelhouse, the Night Watch, Land's End, and I would try to come to his shows whenever I wasn't playing a gig myself. I learned quickly, after the first time when I came in all grubby from clam digging, and he invited me up to play a few tunes on his break, to never step foot into a Hobo Jim show without a clean shirt on and finger picks in my pocket. As many of you know, that summer gig turned into a permanent life in Alaska, and my horizons expanded from playing gigs to booking festivals, leading up to booking the ultimate festival, the Alaska State Fair, for the past 2 decades. It has been my honor and privilege to book Hobo Jim at every one of those events over the years and watch the magic of his music charm audience members spanning 5 generations. His songs are touching and timeless and will endure beyond all of our lifetimes. Teach them to your children and grandchildren. Tell budding songwriters to go and listen to Hobo Jim's music if they want to learn from the best. Some of my most cherished memories are coming up on stage and singing harmonies with Jim from Talkeetna Bluegrass Festival days in the 90s right up to his closing show in the Sluice Box at the fair just last month. I remember him sitting in a lawn chair at a TBF festival in 1992 with my 3-year-old daughter asleep in his lap, then playing for her class in the 1st and 2nd grades and ultimately playing Blessed at her wedding. I could share so many more stories. Hobo Jim has been such an integral part of my 38 years in Alaska, and I honestly can't imagine an Alaskan without him. There has never been and will never be another like him, and I am utterly heartbroken along with all of you. My heart goes out to most of all his backwards girl, Cindy. You are in my constant thoughts and prayers. And she posted the most recent video, I Am Alaska. She said, this beautiful video of I Am Alaska captures Hobo's talent, passion, personality, and quintessential smile so beautifully. Thank you, Steve Rychetnik, for creating and sharing this. So that video as well, I asked Steve, I didn't know it was Steve at the time, but I asked for permission to share the hell out of that video, and he granted that. So that video, I Am Alaska, will also be included in my montage on the other social channels, Twitter and YouTube. This next story comes from Gail St. Hillaire. Just a little story how I met Hobo. When we first moved to Homer, we bought a little piece of property out East End Road. And after just 3 weeks, our trailer burnt down, lost everything just before winter. Had just landed a job at the Porpoise Room, which gave us a benefit, where every musician from Homer and across the bay donated their time, along with all the generous people in Homer, which made us fall in love with the town even more. Stayed there at least another 10 years, which we were lucky enough to know Hobo and Cindy. That was around 1979. Being a minister, Hobo married Tom and I on Bishop's Beach on a raw, windy day in March. Refused to take a dime. I remember his words asking us to vow to be friends forever, which we are. Seeing these videos of Hobo just brings me back to some wonderful times and some great music. If I could go back to any time in my life, that would be it. Thank you, Hobo Jim. This next one is from a gentleman named Herman Ravenwood. I would like to share the story of how I first met Jim. In 1985, I moved to Nikiski with my mother and sister, living in Sleeper's Trailer Court. My mother had his Thunderfoot album cassette tape, which I borrowed frequently. I listened to it so often that I began to memorize the lyrics. In 1986, Jim was performing at the Cars Mall in Kenai by Cars Payless, celebrating the mall's 16th birthday. I was standing across the hall by Kenny's shoes, singing along to his songs. The person next to me, don't remember his name, heard me and went and talked to Jim. Next thing I know, Jim called me onto the makeshift stage to sing a couple of songs. We did Logger's Lullaby and Dramamine Fisher. When we finished, Jim gave me autographed copies of his Lost and Dying Breed and Where Legends Are Born albums, at which point I became a true fan for life. That is how I first met Jim. I am heartbroken at the passing of a friend and an Alaskan icon. This one is from Kevin Hall. We were just teenagers, me being 17-year-old Alaskan and Jim being a year older, just arriving in our state. First time I saw him was at a bar in Kenai, known for not questioning underage drinkers like myself and many of my friends, Kenai Joe's. Incidentally, unlike many of the bars we frequented, Joe's has been going strong since the 30s or 40s and still thriving in exactly the same location and in the same building. At that time, 1972, I thought Jim was just another cannery rat who would be moving through our community, coming and going with the salmon run. Boy, was I wrong about that. He was working in the cannery by day and would bring his guitar to the bar at night and play for tips and drinks. He was covering songs by Dylan, Arlo Guthrie, Jerry Jeff Walker, and many others with a folk sound, but with Jim's own touch and the patter only he could add in between songs, weaving it all together with his stories. I almost looked forward to him breaking a string because I knew we were in for another lengthy Jim story, of course, while he was changing the string and returning. I think I was most impressed when I heard him do Alice's Restaurant complete all 20-plus minutes. We all knew he was special and, as it turns out, a pretty smart businessman too. He began to befriend the owners of the local establishments to become the exclusive house entertainers sometimes for years at Kenai Joe's in Kenai, the Night Watch in Soldotna, the Club Bar in Homer, and BJ's Bar in Soldotna, just to mention a few. Things really changed, though, when he started writing his own songs and released his first album, Thunderfoot. Soon his show was all his own material, and people couldn't get enough. I have a theory about that. You see, we all have a story to tell, but tragically, most of us live in a quiet obscurity, and then one day, a storyteller like Jim Varsos comes along, and we all go, yes, that's what it's like to be me. For me, Jim says, that is what it's like to be part of this lost and dying breed of stubborn individuals called Alaskans. Thank you, Kevin. I'll be right back after the break with the second segment. Later on, I'm going to read a story in Hobo Jim's words on his trip to Afghanistan and what he did performing for the troops over there. Recently, I sat down with Denny Gum, who was one of the big reasons why Hobo Jim went to Afghanistan, and listened to a few other stories that maybe some people haven't even heard or don't even know unless you've heard Denny tell it, or even Hobo Jim. So without further ado, this was my conversation with Denny.
I met Hobo back in the mid-'90s. He'd already been around a while and was popular. I didn't know who he was. And then one night he played at the Alaska State Fair. Afterwards, he went to like the Moosehead Saloon and was playing there. He and I got to talking, and he got all excited and drugged me outside to his van, opened the door. He wanted to show me his new rifle. I don't know what it was. I don't remember what it was. It was a pretty skookum rifle, though. And then, we got to be good friends, and I'd see him all the time. And, we'd hang out when he was in town periodically, and I'd go to his shows, and kind of a semi-groupie. And at any rate, he was just a really good dude. And I talked to Cindy the other day, and I told her, I said, everybody starts out their story about Jim with my friend Hobo. And that's because he made everyone feel like he was personally their friend. And I went down to Nashville with my daughter back when I got back from an overseas deployment to Iraq. I can't remember if we drove or flew, but we went from the Chicago area down to Nashville. And I think we flew down and Hobo picked us up. But at any rate, we stayed at his house with he and Cindy and his son Sean, and I had a bunch of friends from Special Forces, one of the ODAs that was at Fort Campbell from 5th Group, and we drove over there. Normally, teams don't invite people up into their team room. It's like their own little enclave. But they invited us up, and we all went up and sat in the team room with them, and they all sat around, and Jim got to be good friends with all of them, and then we went out partying that night, went to a pub, and, I embarrassed myself with some karaoke, but everybody else was having a great time, and he and a guy named Mongo, who you may or may not hear about, Jay Hazenbean, they hit it off really well. And because I had made the connection with he and that A-team, he went over later on to a barbecue, a private party, and played for all of them, and he was close to that team. Mongo was the one who called me and said, hey, Cindy wants you to give her a call. And so I gave Cindy a call, and that's when I told her about Jim was everyone's friend. it's been pretty cool. He used to, at every show that I would show up, or my son Donnie, who was in Afghanistan with him, with Hobo, every time we would go to a show, he would always, introduce us and sing the national anthem, and, everybody would stand up and take their hats off, and he always introduced me as my friend who's a Special Forces colonel. I had to keep correcting him. I'm not a Special Forces colonel. I was with Special Forces, but I'm an infantry guy. But yeah, I don't know. He never changed. He kept it the same. At any rate, one day here, probably about 3 years ago, he said, "Hey, I've got something I want you to look at." And we went out to his vehicle, and he pulled out a British 303 Enfield, and pulled out an Arisaka Japanese rifle with a chrysanthemum on the back, with a chrysanthemum on the bolt. And he asked me, what I thought of him, and could I do some research on him? And I said, sure, absolutely. So the British 303, it was painted on the side, something about the Punjab, some second Punjab, whatever. So I got online and started doing some research and came back and told him, I said, yeah, this weapon was used on the Northwest frontier by the second Punjab regiment or battalion, whatever. And I can't speak for the Arisaka, but and then I gave him back to him. And I want to say it was about a year later. He said, hey, I got something for you. And I happened to drive out to Wasilla where he was staying. And unbeknownst to me, he was going to give me those two rifles. But I had a P-52 London Arms Enfield with the ER crown on and all that had been used in Afghanistan or in the Northwest frontier area. I had come into possession of it, and I wanted to give it to him as a gift. It was exactly like the weapons that were used during the Civil War when when England was supplying the Confederacy with arms. At any rate, so he takes me out to the vehicle, and he says, here, I want to give you these. And he gave them to me, and I said, well, I got something for you. And I gave him that dated 1861 or 1862 P-52 British Enfield percussion cap rifle. And I don't know, there's just so many stories I can tell about Jim. And one night before he went to Afghanistan, my son had contacted me. The 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment was over there in the coast area at Bob Salerno. My son got a hold of me out of the blue and said, Dad, everybody wants Hobo to come over and play, and my regimental sergeant, my regimental sergeant major and battalion commander, they're all behind this. I said, and my son said, I know people who can do this. I said, Donnie, I don't know anything. I can't help you. And he goes, just contact this Captain Johnson, this Captain Aaron Denisian. Denisian was the S1. Johnson was like a morale support guy, MWR, morale, welfare, and recreation, some shit. So anyway, I reached out to these guys, and they said, yeah, we'd really like to have him come over. And they said, how many guys in his band? I went back to Jim. I said, Jim, how many guys in your band? He said, just me. And I went back to them and said, just one. He said, how much gear does he have? Jim, they want to know how much gear you have. Just a guitar. Like, okay. And they want to know, when you can come over. He said, I don't know, anytime in March. He said, so as this coordination is going on, I'm like the middleman. And finally, I told Jim, I said, Jim, why don't you coordinate with these guys directly? He goes, no, I feel more comfortable if you were involved. Okay, fine, whatever. So to make a long story short, he ends up giving them his standard name line and all the information, and we coordinate it. And they want to know what it will cost to fly him over. And he said, nothing, I'll be in Germany anyway. I can fly right out of Rheinland. And I said, okay, cool. So we end up coordinating with these guys, and Rachel Saxby was involved too on the other end. I didn't know this, but she actually helped put this shit together because I think Johnson turned to her and said, who the hell is this gum guy? And she said, oh, he's a good dude, like he'll help out or whatever. At any rate, we ended up cutting orders, and Johnson sent me the orders, attention to orders, Department of the Army, blah, 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 James Versus, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got him in my pocket, and he was playing at the Elks and Eagle River one night. And I got these in my pocket, and he's about halfway through his show, and I said, and he's talking about all this stuff about, yeah, they're trying to get me over there, they're trying to do this, they're trying to do this.
But at this time, unbeknownst to him, you've got the orders in your pocket.
Correct.
And you're just waiting for the right time?
Correct. And I said, Jim, you mind if I say something? He goes, yeah, sure. So I get up behind the mic and small audience there, probably 30 people or so. I pull out the orders. I said, attention to orders. And I read them. Jim was almost in tears. He was so excited. Well, as soon as that was over, he had other connections, people he knew out at J-Bear. It was called Fort Rich back then. But they hooked him up to go through CIF and get a complete issue. Everything a soldier would need to take to go to war, minus a weapon. He had everything else. And then he gets a hold of me and he says, I don't know how to put this shit together. Can you come over and help me out? So I drove into Wasilla and stayed with his, he always called him his brother, Bill. They weren't really brothers, but they were like brothers. I went to their house where he was staying, and we broke out his helmet and put it together and put the liner inside and got him all set up. And he'd said, I'm available in March. And they came back and said, well, not a good time for us. And he goes, well, anytime, they said anytime, after April 1st. He said, okay, April 1st it is. And it's because they had Operation Anaconda going on up by Tora Bora trying to find Osama bin Laden. That's why they were totally involved and had no time for entertainment. So he was in Germany. He told me later on he waited around for about 4 days till finally they realized who he was, and they put him on the next flight to Afghanistan. He played for the Oklahoma National Guard there in Kabul, and he used to laugh about, they have this thing called General Order Number 1, which is no sex, no alcohol. He said, I got him in front of the Oklahoma National Guard, and he said, I don't understand this General Order Number 1 thing. He said, you're from Oklahoma. If they want you to fight, they better involve sex and alcohol. He played there, and then he went down to, and I don't know what the order was, but he ended up going down to Salerno and staying there with Donnie and slept above Donnie. And
I think later on, I do have his story in his own words that I got off of his Facebook page. So,
sure.
So, there is kind of a disconnect on the timeline between what he said, but now that you're filling in some of this stuff that maybe he's only shared with a few people.
So I know that he was there from April 1st to April 14th, and he might have been waiting in Germany on April 1st, but sometime about the 4th or so of April, he ended up in Afghanistan. Stayed there till the 14th when he came back, and he had just gotten back, and he and Ken Pelletier were playing a cabin fever reliever out of the Raven Hall, and they finished, and then he went downtown, and I met him and went to the Valley Hotel with him, and he was just back. He still had jet lag. He left Afghanistan 48 hours earlier. And so he and I are sitting there, and he's telling me all these stories, some of the stuff I already told you. But then he starts talking about, they put him on a helicopter and flew him out of Jalalabad into a Special Forces camp. And he landed there, and he got out, and he played.
Was that the rodeo run that he was talking about, where they took mail and
it could have been. I don't know.
Commissary stuff in.
I don't know.
It might have been that story. I think I remember that.
All I know is he told me they flew him into the Special Forces camp, and he played a concert for all these guys over there. And no sooner did he finish than the helicopter lands, and like 5 or 6 guys get off, and they come running over, and they say, did we miss the show? Did we miss the show? We tried to get back as soon as we could. Hobo said, come with me. He took them into a tent, gave them their own 2-hour private show. And when he's telling me this story, he's in tears. They took a patch off their sleeve, a special team patch or whatever, and gave it to him. And that meant the world to him. Anyway, that's some of the background. There was one night he was in the Moosehead Saloon playing, drinking a lot of tequila, and he and I went down to the Valley Hotel afterwards, and he had what he always had. He had a patty melt with gravy all over it, and wet fries, French fries with gravy all over them. And he ate that. I ate that or something else. And we left there. We went back to behind the Moosehead where his van was. He wanted me to drive him because he was a little under the weather alcohol-wise, drinking tequila. I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And he said, yeah, just drive me out to they're on Lake Lucille, some Best Western. Take me out there. I got a room there. Drop me off. And then bring my van back here and park it right here and I put the keys somewhere. I can't remember where I hid them, but I put the keys somewhere. But anyway, as we're leaving, we pulled out from behind the Moosehead Saloon. We're heading out towards Wasilla. They were just passing the intersection of the Old Glen Highway by the Chevron station, and there was a Palmer police officer sitting there, and he had his hat down. I figured he was doing reports or something, and the light's yellow. I went through the light on yellow, and right above my head as I was going through it, I saw it turn red. And I thought, if it's yellow, it's my intersection. It's no big deal. So we started to go up the hill, and all of a sudden, here comes this Palmer police officer with his lights on, coming up behind us. And there was another car in between he and I. And he said, "Oh my God, he's going to stop you for running that red light." I said, "My red light." Or, like it was my yellow light, it was my intersection. He's going to stop that other guy. Oh, no. He went right around that guy, pulled me over at the top of the hill, up where the Chinese restaurant used to be. I think there's Alaska USA or something there now.
Yep.
That's where he pulled me over. And I'm sitting there in the car, and the guy came up and said, he said, "I need to see your driver's license, vehicle registration, proof of insurance." And I said, "Well, can I get out of the vehicle? Because my license is in my front pocket. I can't get to it sitting down." He goes, "Yeah, sure." I get out, I get my license. And Jim, meanwhile, his car is, you got to picture this. Here's his red Astro van or whatever the hell he was driving. And he goes to open the console, and it's like a jack-in-the-box. Everything springs out and opens the glove compartment. And everything shoots out like a jack-in-the-box. And he's digging through all this stuff, and he goes, I've got the registration here somewhere. And I turned to the officer, and I said, you might have to run the plate, because we're having a hard time finding it here. I'm sure it's here, but, good luck, right? And as far as insurance goes, I'm sure he's got insurance, but if he doesn't, I do. And I gave him my insurance company and name. And he said, all right. He goes back to his vehicle. Jim's car is full of Burger King wrappers, strings, CDs, amps, guitars, 2 months of trash in there, right? Because he's always on the go. He's never had a chance to clean it out. Or didn't make the time, whatever. At any rate, the officer comes back and says, well, I'm just going to give you a warning for running that red light back there. And I said, I didn't run that red light. I said, it was yellow when I went through it. You were paying attention. You'd have seen that. It turned red as I was going through. I said, that was my intersection. He goes, well, I'm giving you a warning anyway. Kind of backpedaled a little bit. They said, and anyway, you're going kind of fast and it's raining. And I said, well, whatever. It didn't start raining until after you stopped me. So, whatever. So anyway, we drove on our way, and that was the end of that. It is what it is, right? I mean, I assume the officer either didn't know the law, and when he looked up, the light was red, and I was in the middle of the intersection. His assumption was I went through on red. And another option is he doesn't know the law, he was untrained, or maybe he just, of course, the worst case scenario would be that he was unethical, figured, hey, this guy just came out from behind the Moosehead Saloon, he's got to be drunk, I'll pull this guy over, and, if he's drunk, which he probably is, he won't have a leg to stand on. But I don't think that was the case at all. I think it was simply a matter of him looking up, seeing the red light, assuming I had gone through on red, pulled me over. No big deal, it all worked out. I took Jim home and brought the car back and parked it. But yeah, he was back to that when he was telling me the SF story, the Special Forces story, almost in tears. I mean, he was tired, jet lagged, but very, very emotionally affected by what happened outside of Jalalabad. He did tell me a funny story, which I don't know if anybody else has heard, but when he was in Salerno, he ended up being really good friends with the Sergeant Major, whoever it was. The Sergeant Major was really a stickler for, every time you leave the tent, you got to have your helmet and your body armor on. And Jim went out to take a leak or something. He was going to go to the bathroom and wearing his cowboy hat. Then all of a sudden, this Sergeant Major starts yelling at him. Soldier, what are you doing on that cowboy hat on? Blah, blah, blah. He goes, I'm the entertainment. He said after that, they hit it off. They were best of friends.
That's great. Well, Denny, I've got a lot of this show to get to. There's a lot of other people that have given me their stories, as well as permission to make a montage with their personal pictures of him. I really appreciate you taking the time for this because we all loved Hobo Jim. We're all gonna
devastated.
Yes, it was very devastating. We're all going to miss him. Nothing's going to be the same, especially for those of us around the state that come back to the state fair just to see him. So
The sluice box.
yes, sir, the sluice box and the very last show of the state fair. None of us will ever forget that. I've got a couple of stories that I've told or will tell on this podcast and on this episode, and I look forward to completing this, and I really appreciate your time and your very colorful stories of your experiences with Hobo Jim. Thank you so much.
Hell of a guy.
This story is from Sarah Wolfe. I was about 7 or 8, and Hobo Jim was visiting my school. It happened to be my birthday, and he brought me to the front and sang me happy birthday. Always been one of my favorite memories. That is a very cool story, Sarah. It's not too often you get called up on stage on your birthday by a performer, but to have it be Hobo Jim, that's totally amazing. I know he rocked it out for you. This next story comes from Twyla, Denise, Kelley, BEntley. Twyla, I hope I pronounced that correct. So Twyla had a video on her page of her son and Hobo Jim letting him play the guitar because he was deaf. So I will get into the story and then I will post a video later. Hobo Jim has the biggest heart of anyone I know. He always takes time to interact with people that sometimes get lost in the crowd. It was a privilege to be at a private show for the birthday of a close friend of Hobo Jim's at Iva's place in Soldotna. Michael Shane Hawkins went up to shake Jim's hand when he was told that Shane was deaf, but he loves his music. He feels the vibration of the sound, and this is what happened next. So Twyla's story, you absolutely have to see the video, which I will get posted in my collaboration to understand fully what was going on. But thank you, Twyla. This story is from Suzy Parker. Hobo Jim and his words to his songs are the commentary to my Alaskan life experiences. The first time I saw him live at Lake Lucille in Wasilla, I heard Wild and Free and started to cry. I knew it was my life's theme song. I told him that when he came to KMBQ, Voice of the Valley radio station for an interview, I got to sit in and it was amazing. I got to tell him I was the lady who always cried when he played my favorite song. He gave me a CD and a broken guitar string, laughing out loud. I'd become such a groupie, following him all over from Iditarod restart at Kinnick Bar to the Moosehead in Palmer, and at a start behind the scenes in Anchorage about 1997 where I was representing KMBQ, then at a restart up towards Talkeetna where there was more snow for a restart, and then saw him somewhere in Seward. It was from 1989 until 2002 before I returned to California, but his music has been a constant in my life, always reminding me of my best years living in Alaska. What a great story to end the second segment. I will be right back. So another one of my personal stories involving Hobo Jim happened at the Sluice Box. I've seen multiple shows where it was just Hobo Jim, and never ever have I seen him stop in the middle of the show because something wasn't right and interrupt his show, get off the stage to fix it. I've never seen that. The sound guy kept screwing with things, and Hobo didn't like it. And he kept telling him, in between songs, he was telling him, hey, can you fix this? Can you fix that? You know, like you normally see musicians, if you need the mic volume up or down, or, you know, or a guitar in the monitor or something, you know, they have their hand signals to let somebody know. Well, after a couple of songs, the sound guy just kept screwing with it and wasn't fixing what Hobo wanted. So he took his strap off, laid his guitar down, jumped off the stage, literally off the front of the sluice box stage, and ran over and laid into the sound guy. I spoke with him about it. I was asking him what was going on. He said, yeah, he wasn't fixing my sound the way I wanted it. You know, the sound guy was screwing things up, and Hobo didn't like it. So later on, possibly the same weekend, it was the barn dance, you know, Ken Peltier, after one of the concerts when they had the big white tent right next to the Borealis Theater. Hobo had seen me. I don't remember who he was sitting with, whether it was Suzy, Crosby, or, you know, somebody else. Well, he called me over and had me tell that story to say, hey, yeah. So the point of my story is you've never, ever seen Hobo stop in the middle of his sets and interrupt his show to take care of something like that. So this was very, very important to him to have done that in the middle of his show. So I don't really have a story about this, other than the fact that I found this picture on the fan club page. A gentleman by the name of Barry Drummond posted it, but it's not Hobo Jim in his cowboy hat. He's actually got a different style hat on, and Barry's caption to this was, I first seen you in 2009 in the Yukon bar. What a legend you are. Rest in peace, Jim, from Scotland. And I asked for permission to use that picture. Barry came back and said, of course. Somewhere on that picture, I can't quite find it without zooming in too far, but he said, I gave him my kilt pin that he has on in this picture. So I'm going to look for that a little bit closer, but this picture will be posted in the montage. So this next one is the second story that Suzy Crosby gave me, and I am going to read it word for word, exactly how she sent it to me in the messenger, after asking her for permission to use the previous story. Hi, Scott. I'd be absolutely honored. I could tell you a couple more good ones too. Like the day in early 1995, Jim called me about 8:45 a.m. and asked if I knew the Alaska Flag song. I said, sure. And he said, good, sing it for me. So I sang it and he said, okay, now tell me the chords. I sang the melody again, but instead of the lyrics, it was C, C, F, walk it down to a D minor, C to an A minor, and then D7 to G, and so on to the end of the song. I asked him what was going on, and he said he'd been asked, as the newly honored Alaska State Balladeer, to open the legislative session at 9 a.m. with a rendition of the flag song, but had spaced out learning it until that morning. It must have gone well. I never heard anyone say a bad word about his rendition, so that's funny, right? Now fast forward to around 2013. Leroy Heaven, a really special friend to Ken Peltier and myself, had passed away, and Leroy's wife, Margaret, asked Ken and me to sing the Alaska Flag song at his memorial service. I told Ken we'd better get together and run through it a couple times because the way that song was written, with just a single melody line, there are as many ways to interpret the chords as there are Alaskan musicians. I went over to Ken's place with my guitar and said, okay, let me hear yours first. To my astonishment, Ken's version was identical to mine, right down to the lovely, although non-essential D minor chords, walked down from the F. I said, wow, that's the first time I've ever heard anyone play it the same way I do. To which Ken replied rather proudly, Hobo Jim taught it to me. I said, well, that explains it because I taught it to Hobo Jim. Well, Suzy, I think that's been probably my most favorite story so far to have told. So thank you for giving me the privilege to do it. I know I can definitely see Ken sitting there with his guitar, chest puffed up, smile on his face, and telling you that Hobo Jim taught him your version of the Alaska Flag song. So thank you again. Thank you so much. So I had hoped to have a couple of close friends tell a few of their stories live, but unfortunately I was unable to make that happen. So at this point in time, I'm out of stories, and I'm going to end this show with Hobo Jim's final words most of us have read. You know, when you're a singer and songwriter and musician, you tell your stories writing those songs through what you've seen, what you've lived. And I don't think I could end this show on a better way from a man who's loved this state and loved its people for so long with his final words. With that being said, this is Scott. This is the Upper One Podcast. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for loving Hobo Jim. We're all going to miss him. Alaska. To me, folks, this is a word that still lights up every circuit in my body. My mind rushes with images of snowy mountaintops, rugged blue seas, vast unseen, untamed wilderness, images of bears and eagles, moose and wolves, walrus, and thundering herds of caribou. All of this my wondering eyes have seen, along with its more gentle beauties like the brilliant colored lupine and fields of fireweed or snowy Arctic cotton. It is the dress of the commercial fisherman in his Helly Hansen's brown rubber boots and knit hat, the lumberjack in his Carhartts with the red suspenders and flannel Pendleton shirt, the colorful dance costumes of the Haida, Tlingit, Inuit, Yupik, and Athabascan, those brave hunter nomads who first tread this beauty. Rivers abundant with rich red salmon, oceans of giant king crab, and barn door halibut. It is the free spirit of free people. May you never lose that nor take it for granted. It is the legends I have known as friends, Colonel Norman Vaughan, the great Antarctic explorer and master of sled dogs, the joyful face of Susan Butcher, the unstoppable Joe Reddington Sr., and his longtime friend on the trail, Dick Mackey, father of a fine line of champion mushers, including his son Lance Mackey, one of the toughest men I know. I knew when I first looked out on the Kachemak Bay from the crest that I found my home. The search was over, and I now was proudly an Alaskan. Alaska has been wonderful to me, and I owe our state a great debt of gratitude. To all of you, to the land, I thank you all. There is so much more I would like to say, but nothing I write would be big enough to encompass my feelings for our state. You will just have to take the body of my life's work, and maybe one of those songs will touch you in the way this land has touched me. Though my body leaves this world, I leave a piece of my spirit with Alaska as I take a piece of Alaska's spirit with me. Thank you all, and may God bless and keep you all. Hobo Jim.